Usually when we talk about solving a massive global crisis, there's this expectation of precision, like an engineering mindset.
Right, totally.
If you find a leak in a dam, the diagnostic tools show you the exact structural failure,
Yeah.
right? The pressure points, the material weaknesses.
Exactly.
The engineers just point and say, there it is. We need 3 tons of reinforced concrete right there, and we're safe. And we love that approach.
Really do.
We are deeply comforted by things being visible, categorized, and just, having a direct mechanical solution.
It provides this illusion of ultimate control. I mean, we want a binary system, right? Like broken or fixed,
Yeah.
sick or cured.
Right. But step into the world of human conflict, of global war and societal peace, and suddenly that diagnostic X-ray machine is just completely shattered.
Yeah, it doesn't work at all.
We're looking at a landscape that is murky and complex and honestly deeply irrational. And yet our default reaction is still to try and apply those same mechanical patches.
To a dam that is fundamentally made of the wrong material to begin with.
Exactly. We treat the symptoms with incredible, frantic urgency. Writing treaties, holding summits, drawing borders, but we almost entirely ignore the root cause of the human disease.
We treat peace as if it were a legal contract rather than a psychological condition.
Wow, yeah, a legal contract.
And when those contracts inevitably break down, we act so surprised, as if the failure was in the phrasing of the treaty rather than the fundamental nature of the people who actually signed it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you're here with us today because this conversation is going to fundamentally challenge how you think about the future of society.
And how we organize ourselves.
Yeah, and honestly, how we raise the next generation. We're unpacking some absolutely profound source material today.
Really profound.
We're looking at excerpts from Maria Montessori's writings on education and peace, specifically Chapter 3. And look, if your only association with the name Montessori is like wooden blocks and very quiet toddler classrooms.
Which is what most people think of, right?
Yeah, if that's what you're thinking, you need to completely reset your expectations. Because this is not a manual on how to teach a child to tie their shoes.
Not even close. It is a sweeping philosophical analysis of humanity in the industrial age.
Right.
Montessori isn't just talking about alternative schooling methods here. She is examining the fundamental organization of the human spirit in a heavily mechanized, heavily armed world.
Which is intense.
It is. She is trying to answer why civilized societies keep dragging themselves into the abyss of war.
So our mission today is to explore a really uncomfortable question. Why does traditional anti-war rhetoric, all the speeches, the awareness campaigns, the academic debates, why does it consistently fail to actually prevent conflict?
Is it because it does fail?
Repeatedly.
It does. And to answer that, we are going to explore a radical proposition, the idea that education itself has to be entirely rebuilt.
From the ground up, right? Not just tweaked, not just adding a conflict resolution seminar to the curriculum on Tuesdays, rebuilt from the absolute ground up to serve as the ultimate scientifically precise weapon for peace.
This text really operates as a profound warning. It forces us to look at a massive mismatch between our external technological reality and our internal psychological development.
It's a huge gap.
Huge. It asks us to consider whether the very way we condition human beings from childhood is actually making peace an impossibility.
Okay, let's start with this striking observation about our modern era. Montessori looks at the landscape of global society and points out that education has this boundless, infinite significance right now.
Right.
She makes this incredibly bold claim right out of the gate, saying education is the best weapon of peace. But then she immediately contrasts that philosophical ideal with the actual physical weapons sitting in our silos.
Yeah, consider the terrifying power and the absolute technical perfection of modern physical weaponry. Artillery, bombers, automated drones, nuclear submarines.
It's staggering.
Trillions of dollars and millions of hours of the most rigorous scientific thought are poured into calibrating a targeting system, right? So it can hit a coordinate halfway across the globe.
And people trust their national defense entirely to these highly calibrated, scientifically perfected tools.
Exactly.
And then she says, look at that absolute technological perfection. Now look at our education system.
The contrast is brutal.
It really is. We are essentially trying to secure peace in a modern, hyper-complex world using an educational system that is equipped with bows and arrows.
Bows and arrows.
That image is just devastating to me. Bows and arrows versus bombers. We have this staggering discrepancy in how we allocate our genius.
It perfectly encapsulates the stagnation, Physical weapons have evolved through rigorous science, immense investment, and relentless iterative innovation.
Every little flaw is engineered out.
Right. But the weapon of education, the tool that is supposed to ensure the actual safety, cohesion, and progress of humanity, it hasn't evolved in any meaningful structural way since the Industrial Revolution.
I picture it like trying to run a hyper-advanced, globally networked, modern operating system on floppy disk-era hardware.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You've got all these incredibly powerful, fast-moving programs running simultaneously, globalized trade algorithms, instantaneous mass communication, complex geopolitical alliances.
Not because of mass destruction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the processing chip inside the computer, the human mind that actually has to manage all of this, is running on a behavioral architecture designed 2 centuries ago.
We've upgraded our machines and our ability to destroy to a terrifying degree, but we've completely neglected to upgrade the human hardware to handle that exact same power.
Society has completely transformed externally. We have built these massive machines, these intricate systems of logistics that span the globe.
We have mastered external physics. We can bend metal and split the atom.
But internally,
Internally, Montessori argues that humanity remains entirely ignorant and fundamentally unorganized.
wow, ignorant and unorganized.
We don't understand our own psychological machinery anywhere near as well as we understand a combustion engine.
When you look at the constant reactive chaos of global news, that diagnosis feels uncomfortably accurate.
It really does.
I mean, we have the telecommunications infrastructure to talk to anyone on Earth in a fraction of a second, but we don't have the internal organization to know how to resolve a basic resource dispute without threatening violence.
True defense for humanity simply cannot rest on an arsenal of weapons. Because as long as we rely on arsenals, wars will just follow one after another in a perpetual cycle.
Right, an arsenal doesn't solve a conflict.
Exactly. It just temporarily suppresses the weaker side until they can build a bigger arsenal.
Until they catch up.
Yes. No nation can ever be genuinely secure or prosperous until we place our faith in the weapon of peace, which is education. But, education absolutely cannot remain in its current bow and arrow form to do this.
We are profoundly outmatched by our own creations. If we are facing artillery and airstrikes in terms of the complexity of our global crises, we can't just stand there with a wooden bow.
No, we have to create and perfect a new weapon, the weapon of human enlightenment.
But here is where we run into a major roadblock in how we usually think about this. Because the standard playbook for peace education usually just involves telling kids that war is bad.
Right. Just saying, don't do it.
And Montessori completely dismantles that approach.
She dismantles what we might call the illusion of negative peace education.
Negative peace education.
Yeah. If we want education to be the cornerstone of actual lasting peace, it cannot be reduced to mere prohibitions. It cannot just be a list of do-nots.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because this concept challenged me at first.
Go for it.
She says, it's not enough to take away toy guns from children. It's not enough to remove the glorification of war from our history textbooks or stop teaching about battles as if they are glorious adventures.
Right, she's very clear on that.
She even implies it's not enough to just sit kids in a circle and teach them to love and respect all living things. And my immediate reaction to that was, wait, why not?
It seems counterintuitive.
It really does. If we want a peaceful society, isn't removing the plastic weapons and the violent stories a highly logical, practical first step? Why is she so dismissive of simply removing the symbols of war?
Because that approach is entirely focused on the negative side of the equation. It is an education that only tries to prevent a specific outcome, which is war, rather than actively creating the psychological conditions for peace.
Ah, okay.
Montessori uses this beautiful poetic metaphor to explain this. She says trying to achieve peace just through these prohibitions is like trying to chase away a dark cloud without bothering to plant the seeds for rain.
Chasing away a cloud without planting for rain.
Yes.
So you're standing in an empty, barren field, expending all this frantic energy, waving your arms at the sky to stop a storm from coming.
Exactly.
But you're doing absolutely nothing to cultivate the soil beneath your feet so that something sustainable can actually grow.
That's the perfect way to visualize it. Banning a toy gun is just waving at the cloud.
Wow.
It alters the outward behavior temporarily, but it doesn't change the underlying soil of the human spirit. Wars cannot be stopped by anti-war rhetoric or superficial censorship alone.
It's just a Band-Aid.
Right. And she poses this phenomenal speculative question that exposes the flaw in this thinking. She asks, if superficial prohibitive education could actually stop wars, wouldn't they have been stopped centuries ago?
It's so true. I mean, the concept of peace isn't some new avant-garde idea we just invented in the 21st century.
No, not at all.
We've had thousands of years of civilized society, of philosophers, of religious leaders standing at podiums preaching that human life is sacred.
Millennia of moral instruction telling people to love their neighbors and turn the other cheek.
If preaching could cure the disease, we would have been cured during the Renaissance.
Exactly. So we have to ask, if the message has been broadcast so loudly for so long, why does the violence continue with such mechanized efficiency?
And the answer is pretty sobering, isn't it?
Very, because people do not go to war because they possess an inherent uncontrollable bloodlust.
Right.
They don't march to the front lines because they played with toy soldiers as toddlers and just, want to experience the real thing. The vast majority of people actually fear the curse of war. They actively dream of avoiding it.
So how do millions of people consistently end up in trenches, pointing weapons at strangers?
They're dragged into it by immense moral and material pressure.
Moral and material pressure.
Think about the sheer sociological weight required to tear a person away from their home, their family, their career, and send them into the inferno of a battlefield.
It's unfathomable, really.
It requires a massive mobilization of economic necessity, nationalistic propaganda, fear of the other, and systemic coercion.
People don't become soldiers because of a history textbook.
No, they become soldiers because the structural forces of their society leave them no other psychological or material option. War is an incredibly complex systemic phenomenon.
It requires deep structural analysis of human organization, not just surface-level slogans on a bumper sticker.
Exactly.
If the pull of war is this massive, systemic material pressure cooker, then taking away a plastic toy gun isn't just insufficient, it's almost insultingly naive.
It's like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a massive arterial wound.
Right. We are overwhelmed by global events. The economy shifts, a demagogue rises to power, resources become scarce, and suddenly we are like children lost in a dark forest.
Alone, terrified, freezing at every rustle and shadow.
Yeah. We don't understand the macroeconomic or psychological forces happening to us, and we don't know how to defend ourselves collectively.
That image of the frightened child in the forest connects directly back to the idea that internally we are profoundly unorganized.
We possess the telecommunications to orchestrate global supply chains.
But internally, morally, we are shivering in the dark, reacting purely out of fear and isolation.
And if preaching peace fails and banning toys fails, we are forced to look at the one institution that has access to almost every human being during their most formative years.
The school system.
We have to look at what the traditional school system is actually doing to these children every single day. What kind of internal architecture is it building?
And the reality is, it is building a factory of selfishness.
A factory of selfishness.
Root traditional schooling is actively teaching isolation. It is actively conditioning the human mind for zero-sum competition.
Which is terrifying when you really break it down.
The nations of the adult world are already disconnected, with everyone fiercely looking out for their own immediate personal well-being.
Right.
But instead of providing an antidote to this, the modern educational system serves as the training ground for it. It institutionalizes the idea that the child must walk entirely alone and chase only personal gain.
Think about the mechanics of the traditional classroom for a second.
Yeah, let's look at it.
Children are placed in a room together, but they are taught explicitly not to help each other.
Which is so bizarre when you think about it as a model for society.
It really is. If a classmate is struggling with a concept, and you slide your paper over to show them how to solve it, what happens?
You are punished. It is called cheating.
Exactly. The entire structure is designed to condition them to care exclusively about their own individual metric. Passing to the next grade, getting the gold star, winning the academic prize.
And because of the way grading curves work, you often only win that prize if the person sitting next to you loses.
It is the exact psychology of a reality TV elimination show.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You put 20 people on an island, and the fundamental unspoken rule is every person for themselves. You can smile at each other, you can eat together.
But ultimately, for you to win the grand prize, everyone else has to be voted off.
You have to outwit and outlast them. Now, that makes for compelling television because it generates conflict.
Drama, yeah.
But imagine using that exact same paranoid elimination game psychology as the foundational development model for an entire generation of human beings.
It's wild. How can we possibly expect these kids to spend 12 years in a zero-sum environment and then graduate and suddenly know how to build a unified, peaceful, cooperative, global society?
We can't.
We cannot. It is a psychological impossibility. And the toll this takes on the individual is immense.
What happens to them psychologically?
Experimental psychology shows us that children subjected to this constant, isolated, striving, reach adulthood, fundamentally exhausted.
Exhausted.
Yes. They are depleted by a decade and a half of viewing every interaction as a potential threat to their own status.
That sounds like a terrible way to live.
And this leads to one of the most vital metaphors in Montessori's entire philosophy. She says these exhausted adults emerge into society acting like grains of sand in a desert.
Grains of sand. That visual is so specific.
It is.
Because a grain of sand is completely, fundamentally alone. It might be physically touching millions of other grains, just like we are surrounded by people in a crowded city or on social media.
Right. Proximity isn't connection.
Exactly. There is absolutely no structural bond between them.
And crucially, a grain of sand bears no fruit. It is sterile.
Wow.
You cannot grow a garden in loose, dry sand. It creates nothing on its own, and it cannot combine with the sand around it to build anything stable without an external binding agent.
It accurately described how modern burnout feels. You're just this tiny, exhausted pebble bouncing against other exhausted pebbles on your commute, in your office, in your neighborhood.
But the metaphor goes a terrifying step further. What happens to a vast desert of loose, disconnected sand when the weather changes?
Right. What happens when the wind picks up?
When the storm arrives, which in this context represents a severe economic depression, a political crisis, or the escalating drums of war, these disconnected, spiritless little particles have no root system.
No collective strength.
None! They have no social fabric to anchor them. They are effortlessly swept up by the whirlwind. They are blown into a blinding, destructive sandstorm, spinning in a deadly dance, completely at the mercy of the prevailing winds.
That is a chilling visual. If you look at a forest, right, the roots of the trees intertwine beneath the soil.
Yes, the mycelial network.
They actually communicate and share nutrients. They hold the earth together. A massive storm might blow through and break a few branches, but the forest as a structure stands firm.
Because they are connected.
But if you have systematically stripped away all those roots, all that connection, and turned everyone into isolated grains of sand through 12 years of competitive, selfish education.
The whole thing collapses.
Yeah. The moment a charismatic demagogue stands up or a geopolitical crisis triggers mass panic, the population is swept right into the machinery of conflict.
They are mobilized for destruction precisely because they have nothing solid holding them together in peace.
That is the ultimate tragic consequence of the factory of selfishness. It doesn't just make people unhappy.
No, it creates a population that is structurally highly susceptible to being mobilized for war.
They lack the social fabric to resist the pressure.
Exactly. So true education, the kind that could actually act as a weapon of peace and save humanity, it cannot just be a minor curriculum reform.
We can't just change the textbooks.
No, it requires a monumental shift. It requires the awakening of the spirit within the human being, realizing their inner value, and preparing young minds to actually comprehend and manage the incredible technological era they live in.
Okay, so if the traditional system assumes children are just blank slates, we need to program for competition. And that programming is turning us into exhausted grains of sand, waiting to be blown away by the next historical storm.
What is the alternative?
Yeah, what is the alternative? How does Montessori believe we should be looking at the human mind? Because she isn't just a critic tearing down the old system. She offers a totally different, incredibly detailed paradigm.
She points us toward what she calls a new continent for conquest.
A new continent.
And she's not talking about physical geography or space exploration. The new continent is the inner world of the human spirit.
Okay.
To conquer this, to understand its topography, we have to fundamentally change our baseline definition of what a child actually is.
We have to stop seeing them as empty vessels.
Exactly. We must see the child not as an empty vessel to be filled with adult facts, but as a spiritual embryo.
A spiritual embryo. The word embryo is vital there, isn't it?
It is.
An embryo implies something that is already alive, something currently forming. Delicate, but completely holding its own internal blueprint for a complex future life.
Yes.
An embryo doesn't need you to tell it how to grow arms and legs. It needs you to provide the right environment so it can execute its own brilliant internal code.
And that internal code is what she's focused on. This spiritual embryo is endowed with powerful, mysterious instincts that guide its development and creative forces that are actively striving to build a wondrous instrument within the human soul.
To explain the spiritual concept, she uses a deeply technological metaphor that I find absolutely fascinating.
The radio receiver.
Yes. She compares this inner instrument the child is building to a radio receiver. The child is slowly, meticulously constructing this receiver to catch waves from the ether.
Specifically, she says it's designed to receive the sacred waves of divine love and connection that permeate the immensity of the universe.
It is a striking blend of the technological and the profound. She is arguing that just as a physical radio is built to tune in to specific frequencies that are completely invisible to the naked eye,
the human soul is being built in childhood to tune into the frequency of empathy, shared purpose, and a higher universal order.
I try to frame this in a way that feels very present for anyone listening right now. Imagine we are all born with the hardware, like an internal antenna, specifically designed to connect to the ultimate universal Wi-Fi network of humanity.
I love that, the universal Wi-Fi.
Right. This network is where our empathy, our urge to help others, our sense of shared destiny lives, we are born ready to download that signal.
But traditional schooling, with its intense focus on isolation, punishment, rote memorization, and relentless testing.
It acts as a massive signal jammer.
Exactly, a massive signal jammer. And when that signal is jammed for 12 formative years, the child eventually forgets the antenna even exists.
The static becomes so overwhelmingly loud.
The receiver either gets broken entirely or gets permanently tuned to the wrong frequency, the frequency of fear, anxiety, and pure self-interest.
So what happens when we turn off the jammer? How do we know this receiver is actually real and not just romantic poetry?
Because, anyone who has spent time around a group of toddlers knows it can be pure chaos.
Yeah, toddlers aren't exactly known for their divine inner peace.
Right. But what does it actually look like when the spiritual embryo is protected and allowed to tune in? We know it is real through direct observation. When children are placed in an environment that allows them to develop naturally without the signal jamming of constant adult coercion, they undergo a visible transformation.
Really?
Yes. When a genuine love for their surroundings is awakened, an incredible spontaneous inner order emerges. You see a profound sense of discipline and self-mastery.
But it does not come through fear or coercion.
No, it comes as a natural expression of inner freedom.
True discipline isn't about sitting still at a desk because you are terrified the teacher is going to humiliate you.
That's just obedience.
Exactly. True discipline is the deep, unbreakable focus you see in a child who is completely absorbed in building a complex structure or solving a puzzle they genuinely care about.
They will work at it for hours, completely ignoring distractions. It's an inner drive.
They work with immense persistence, fueled entirely by their own energy, unfolding their potential through the active process of creation.
This sensitivity, this ability to receive these higher signals of focus and purpose, is what makes the human being priceless. It is our greatest capacity, far outweighing our ability to memorize historical dates.
And she makes a profound logical leap here regarding how we treat this capacity. Think about how humanity has proven its greatness by harnessing the invisible cosmic energies in the atmosphere.
We mastered electricity. We mastered radio waves. We mastered aerodynamics.
We took these raw forces of nature and organized them to build the modern world. She argues that we must now apply that exact same scientific rigor to harnessing our own internal energies.
She lists them explicitly. The fire of genius, the value of reason, the light of conscience.
The fire of genius.
Yes. She is demanding we treat these not as abstract, poetic concepts, but as literal, measurable forces of nature inside the human being.
Currently, under the traditional system, those immense forces are either scattered to the wind or actively suppressed.
They must be organized, protected, and directed toward the good of human life, just as rigorously and methodically as we organize electricity to power a city.
The fire of genius, the value of reason, the light of conscience. If children possess this profound inner potential, this divine sensitivity and ability to tune into the universe,
it leads to a really painful realization, doesn't it?
It does. Why do we look around the adult world and see so much apathy, cruelty, and dysfunction? If the blueprint is so brilliant, where exactly in the assembly line does the break happen?
The break happens because of a massive, tragic generational chasm.
Okay, chasm.
The root of all modern tragedy, the source of all these societal ills we are trying to fix with treaties and bombs, is that adults simply do not understand children.
Wow.
She writes that Parents and educators, often completely unaware of what they are actually doing, fight a daily war against their own children instead of aiding them in their divine purpose.
She says fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, are described as strangers to one another, separated by a gaping abyss from the very moment of birth.
It is a heavy accusation.
It is. Why is our default instinct as adults to control, manage, and suppress this spiritual embryo rather than observe it and protect it?
It stems entirely from the adult ego and a fundamental misunderstanding of the child's purpose.
The adult ego.
The adult views the child as an incomplete version of themselves, an empty vessel that must be forcefully filled with the adult's accumulated knowledge and prejudices.
Or worse, the adult views the child as a wild animal that must be tamed.
Broken and shaped to fit neatly into the mechanized, subservient roles of industrial society.
The adult demands absolute compliance to the external world, completely bulldozing over the delicate construction of the internal radio receiver.
So, what actually happens to a human psyche when their internal receiver gets crushed by the very adults who are supposed to protect them?
When that vital connection to their own inner genius is severed for the sake of compliance.
The psychological devastation is severe and compounding. This constant friction, this lack of connection between child and adult, misguides the individual.
It poisons their spirit early on.
Yes, it robs them of their internal wealth, preventing them from ever reaching their intended potential. And the progression of this damage is chilling.
It doesn't just disappear when the child grows up, does it?
No, it mutates. The early humiliation of constantly being told your inner drives are wrong or inconvenient eventually morphs into indifference.
You stop caring about your work.
Then it degrades into outright apathy about the world around you, and eventually it can manifest as criminality, a complete disregard for the social fabric.
The child who is humiliated and constantly overpowered grows into an adult who is fundamentally deeply ashamed of themselves and disconnected from their own value.
And there is a highly specific, very recognizable outcome, she mentions, that resonates deeply in our modern culture.
What's that?
She writes that those who are repeatedly frightened and crushed by this process of adult domination eventually retreat. They shrink away from the world. The timid ones close themselves up entirely inside a shell.
The shell. I think about this constantly now.
Have you ever found yourself doing this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They seek only their own personal comfort. They hide themselves away in a tiny, highly controlled, cozy little world of their own convenience.
Terrified of engaging with the broader complexities of society.
If that doesn't perfectly describe the modern epidemic of isolation, I don't know what does. We get so overwhelmed, so disconnected from any sense of higher purpose or community that our highest possible aspiration just becomes extreme coziness.
Extreme coziness, that's so accurate.
And we just want to order our groceries on an app so we don't have to talk to anyone. Lock the door, binge watch a show for 8 hours, and hide in our highly curated, algorithmically smoothed, comfortable little bubbles.
And while society might view that as harmless, the philosophy here says this is an absolute tragedy.
Because all the vast wealth of that human personality, all that fire of genius and light of conscience that was supposed to help illuminate the world, is just lost to the void.
It is trapped forever inside the shell.
And if we zoom out to the macroeconomic or geopolitical level, a society composed entirely of people hiding in their comfortable shells is a society wholly incapable of organizing for peace.
They are those exact grains of sand we discussed earlier.
Passive, isolated, focused only on their immediate comfort, and incredibly vulnerable to whatever storm the ruling class of the economy decides to whip up.
Okay, so the stakes are incredibly high here. To prevent this tragic retreat into the shell, to break out of the isolation, education has to actively fulfill the innate human drive for community.
We had to literally learn how to live together.
Exactly. But how exactly do we build that in practice? Because we can't just talk about community as an abstract theory. What does the mechanism look like?
It cannot be theory. The mechanism is what she calls the ladder of experience and true social education.
The ladder of experience.
Humans have a powerful hidden instinct for society and for participation. But this instinct is like a muscle. It has to be exercised through real-world application.
She argues that our experience shows that if a child or a teenager is deprived of the opportunity to live a genuine social life, to actually make decisions, manage resources, and navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, then the feelings of genuine discipline and morality never actually form inside them.
Without real social experience, any outward display of good behavior is an illusion.
It's not a gift of the spirit. It's not born of inner freedom or a genuine understanding of right and wrong. It is simply the dead fruit of external dressage.
External dressage. I love that term so much.
It's so evocative.
Dressage is when you train a horse to perform highly precise, unnatural movements for the benefit of a rider. You use bits, spurs, and constant repetition to force compliance.
Right.
You can absolutely train a human animal to sit quietly at a desk for 8 hours, to regurgitate facts on command, to stand in a perfectly straight line, but that is just animal training.
It is an aesthetic performance of compliance. It has absolutely nothing to do with morality.
That distinction is vital. A child who doesn't steal because they are terrified the teacher will hit them with a ruler is not a moral child.
No, they're just a terrified child.
True human personality, true morality, is formed through a continuous stream of living, friction-filled experiences. The task of education is to create an environment where these formative social experiences are not just possible, but central.
So what does that actually look like in a classroom?
Imagine a classroom where an argument breaks out over who gets to use a specific tool. In the system of external dressage, the adult swoops in immediately.
Confiscates the tool, punishes both kids, and demands silence.
Exactly. The adult solves the problem with authority. But in a true social education, the environment is structured so the children must negotiate the conflict themselves.
They have to articulate their needs, listen to the other person, and figure out a compromise.
That negotiation is messy, it takes time, but it is the first rung on the ladder of experience.
Let me anticipate the modern skeptic listening right now.
Okay, lay it on me.
In a highly technical, hyper-competitive, mechanized global economy, don't we need to prioritize teaching kids hard technical skills first? They need to know advanced mathematics, coding, data analysis, engineering, just so they can survive and get a job? Why demand they focus on social co-creation, conflict resolution, and community first? Isn't that a luxury we can't afford when they need to be economically competitive?
Oh, it is the most common argument against progressive education.
Yeah.
We don't have time for feelings, we have standardized tests to pass.
Exactly. Montessori anticipates this exact argument, and her counter is just devastating.
What does she say?
We have already organized our machines perfectly. Our technology, our algorithms, our physical infrastructure is highly evolved. But what humanity desperately needs right now is not more machines.
Or even just more biological components to operate those machines
Well,
efficiently.
we need people who actually know how to use those machines for a higher purpose.
We need people who understand the why of our technology, not just the how.
Precisely. Handing immense technical skills to someone with no developed sense of social responsibility is like handing a loaded firearm to a toddler.
It's dangerous.
She insists that a young person must be brought into contact with the world of work and social co-creation before being introduced to the immense secrets of technical evolution.
They need life practice.
They need to be guided, first and foremost, to a profound awareness of their own responsibility to society, to the living tapestry of human organization.
You can't just skip the rungs on the ladder of life experiences.
Yeah.
From the earliest years, a person has to understand, through their own direct lived experience, what it means to be in a community.
They need to plant a garden together and realize that if they don't cooperate to water it, the food dies.
They need to manage a microeconomy within their school. They need to create alongside others, and only then, step by step, do you reveal the technical secrets of society.
Because if you give a young person immense technical power, the secrets of nuclear physics, or today, artificial intelligence, mass communication, synthetic biology, without first grounding them in a deep experiential understanding of human responsibility and social cohesion, you are inviting disaster.
You cannot build a powerful, healthy, peaceful human organization by just snapping your fingers at a peace conference.
It is not an abstract philosophy you can mandate from the top down. It's a practical blueprint that must be built step by step from the roots of childhood.
Which brings us to a deeply unsettling reality.
What's that?
If this ladder of experience, this careful organization of youth into a cohesive, socially responsible, empowered community, is the ultimate blueprint for a powerful society. Is anyone actually paying attention to this power?
Is anyone utilizing the energy of the youth?
Yes.
Yes, they are. But the tragedy is that the people who most effectively recognize and utilize the immense power hidden in children and youth are not the people advocating for peace.
The warmongers are the ones paying attention.
Exactly. Montessori states with deep sorrow that those nations, leaders, and dictators striving for war and dominance have successfully recognized the raw force hidden in the youth.
They do not ignore the young.
No, they have learned exactly how to organize that energy for their own purposes, transforming young people into an active, highly mobilized force for destruction.
This is historically profound. Think about the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, which she was witnessing firsthand, or even extremist movements today. What is their playbook?
They don't just recruit adults.
They build massive, highly organized, passionate grassroots youth movements. They give young people uniforms, a sense of belonging, a clear hierarchy, a shared purpose, even if it's a violently destructive one.
They utilize the human instinct for community. They organize the youth. Meanwhile, what are the advocates for peace doing?
The advocates for peace, the pacifists, have entirely forgotten the children and the adolescents. They have failed to organize them for peace.
It's infuriating.
The architects of war are out there building an army, tapping into the psychological need for connection, while the advocates for peace are sitting around in university halls having polite academic debates.
They're writing treaties, arguing about policy, holding galas, and completely ignoring the actual raw material of the future.
The warmongers are organizing the soul, and the peacemakers are arguing over the font size on a UN resolution.
It is a devastating critique of how the pacifist movement operates. Peace cannot just be a utopia. It cannot be a vague dream, a poem, or merely a passive absence of violence.
When peace is just defined as not fighting, it has no energy. It has no gravity to pull people together.
So what must peace actually be? If it's not just the absence of war, what is it?
It must be treated as a practical, active principle of human civilization. It is the very foundation of social organization, and it stems directly from human nature.
True peace doesn't enslave humanity in boredom or passivity. It elevates it.
It doesn't humiliate us or demand we shrink ourselves. It helps us realize our true constructive power over the universe. Peace is rooted in the human essence, making it universal.
Creating what she calls a science of peace through the proper, community-driven, spiritually aware education of the young is the absolute only viable path forward.
We have to organize for peace with the exact same rigor, the exact same funding, and the exact same deep psychological insight that nations use to organize for war.
We have to make peace active, engaging, and structurally sound.
If we do not cultivate the spiritual embryo, if we do not intentionally build that inner radio receiver tuned to empathy and connection, and if we do not provide the ladder of social experience, we leave the youth as isolated, exhausted grains of sand.
And if we leave them as loose sand, the warmongers will always be there, ready to whip up a storm and use them.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today, moving from the philosophical to the deeply practical.
It's a lot to process.
We started by questioning our desire for mechanical patches to human problems, viewing peace merely as a lack of violence. The idea that if we just take away the toy guns and stop the artillery, everything will be fine.
But through Montessori's lens, we've journeyed to a totally different understanding.
Peace is a highly organized scientific endeavor of human education. It requires upgrading our internal hardware to match our external technology.
It requires a complete paradigm shift. We must move from a system of external dressage, where children are treated as blank slates to be controlled and isolated, to recognizing them as the literal architects of our future society.
They require an environment that allows them to build a foundation of connection rather than a factory of selfishness.
Education isn't about passing a standardized test or beating your classmate in a zero-sum game. It's about unlocking the infinite potential of the human spirit.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought inspired by everything we've unpacked today.
Montessori tells us that true peace is meant to elevate you, to help you realize your profound power to positively shape the universe.
Look at your own daily life. Look at the structures you participate in, the way you work, the way you interact with your family or your colleagues. Are those interactions actively building a science of peace?
Are you doing the messy work of social co-creation?
Or, when things get overwhelming, are you retreating into a shell of personal comfort? The next time you learn something new or teach something to someone else, ask yourself, is this making me a stronger, more connected participant in the living tapestry of the world?
Or am I just training myself to be another isolated grain of sand, waiting for the wind to blow?
A vital question to carry forward into every aspect of our lives. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute privilege to explore these profound, challenging ideas with you.
It really has.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and whatever you do, don't be a grain of sand.